So next up, I want to introduce our speaker, Christelle Ngnoumen. She oversees behavioral research at Voya Financial and was previously at Headspace, BetterUp, and Harvard University. Please welcome Christelle as she shares how we might combine our qualitative insights work with behavioral science methods. Welcome, Christelle.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I should also say good evening and good morning, depending on where in the world it is that you are. And also hello to my team at Voya. I know there are a couple of people from my team tuning in on the East Coast, so hope I do you proud. Also want to extend a huge thank you to our friends from Dovetail and learners for curating this spectacular experience. And of course, welcome to the Bay Area. I want to start us off here today. Great products are built off of effectively diagnosing behavioral challenges. We know that some of the most successful innovations are the ones that help solve users' problems and also get them from their point A to their point B. This can look like many different things. It can be from literally where they are to where they'd like to be. It can be from who they are to who they'd like to become, right? When we think about the different products that in our day-to-day lives we use often, the ones that we love, right? What are some common themes that cut across these things? They're easy, they're timely, they're relevant, they're actionable. To the extent that we can continue to deliver these kinds of experiences for users, users will continue to hire us. To the extent that we fail to do so, well, they will go elsewhere. Now, I do believe that there's some good news here, which is that we have some choice in the matter, right? So we happen to all sit closest to the data, closest to the insights, which means that we can come up with the effective solutions that lift the barriers that make it easy for them. A little bit more about me. I spent the better part of the last 15 years leveraging behavioral science and behavioral science methods to essentially improve people's health and wealth outcomes. So currently, I lead behavioral research at Voya Financial. For anyone less familiar with what we do, who we are a health, wealth, and investment management company. We leverage product analytics, insights, and behavioral science methods. So think behavioral frameworks, experimentation, to essentially optimize people's decisions, right? Particularly things like savings and benefit elections. And so I'm really excited to talk to you all today about how we can leverage some of those types of methods, right? When we're looking at our qual and quant data to do things like better understand customer behaviors, right? The obstacles that get in people's way so that we can lift those barriers and make things easy, timely, relevant. So in terms of how we're going to approach this, right, it's really about thinking about the data that we have already, how to apply frameworks to that. I'm going to talk about behavioral audits. So this may be familiar to some of us already. For those of us for whom it's not, really, I want us to approach thinking about behavioral audits as a diagnostic, right? Human behavior does not exist in a vacuum. But the value of behavioral audits is that it really allows us to start to contextualize human behavior. And how we'll do so is by pulling from across different data sources and different data streams so that if and inevitably when we start to observe that, say, people get stuck or we see, say, drop-off moments when we're looking, say, at our product analytics, right? We can have a little bit more confidence around not only what's happening, but why. So I'm going to talk about a process that we can all start to use, leveraging behavioral science to do that. And another important part about this behavioral audit process, too, is that when we apply this, it can allow us to do things like start to better increase engagement, right? Conversions. We can deliver on outcomes that we know members actually care about. And because we're all in the business, or at least many of us are in the business of something, right? Start to deliver on those types of conversions. So your diagnostic process is going to have a set of inputs and outputs. So this part should look pretty familiar for many of us, again, as we're dealing with data and insights. From an input perspective, depending on kind of where you sit, you may really be used to leveraging maybe a few of these, or as we learned in a few of the talks earlier, like from Claudia's, maybe you are actually leveraging a lot of these different inputs. So we're going to talk about how do we start to triangulate across a lot more of these types of data inputs and sources. So for example, maybe you're used to more trying to understand the different types of behavioral interactions that people are having through your product analytics. But as part of this process, you also want to start to look into marrying that maybe with the user feedback that you're getting through your voice of customer research. You also maybe want to start to pull that with the behavioral sentiments and attitudes that you're getting through your market research data. Maybe you also want to understand how to pull and combine that with, understanding when people are trying to seek help, and also what's the nature of their help that they're seeking when they're interacting with customer support. Maybe you also want to understand how are people engaging with the marketing content and outreach that they're getting. And then finally, I always stress this one, right? Because it's a huge source and wealth that we often overlook, the secondary research that's available and exists out there, right? There are all these academics that are doing really valuable research. I used to be one of them, right? Do you have available pre-existing research that you can also leverage? And the value of that is it saves on cost and time, and you can just leverage that as well. In terms of your outputs, right, we are eventually trying to understand where are people getting stuck, right? What makes it hard for them to get from point A to point B? What makes it hard for them to make decisions? Where are the moments of uncertainty, the barriers? But also kind of the flip side of that. Because as we'll see, when it comes to starting to make or think about solutions, sometimes looking at other segments, right? So say beyond your core users, maybe your power users, also understanding for other segments what's maybe easy for them or what facilitates their ability to take action and to make decisions could end up being what you want to augment, right? To make it easier for someone else to take action. So across all of these, right, we're starting to want in our output to think about the bears and facilitators. This is now where starting to pull from behavioral theory and frameworks can be helpful. When it comes to barriers and facilitators, ultimately you want to start to look into what are some known drivers of behavior. So say with your product analytics, right, you're looking across your experience and you find that people are starting to get stuck at a particular point or there's a drop-off moment, right? So that means that there's an action now that you want to drive. Start to ask yourself, well, to what extent are people capable of actually doing this action? Meaning, to what extent do they have, say, the information or the necessary skills, right, or the education to actually even do this information? When it comes to a particular action now that you know you want to drive because people are getting stuck, to what extent is there the opportunity for doing so? Meaning, as you start to look at your digital or non-digital environment, right, how does it either facilitate or hinder a person's ability to actually take action? And don't forget that the social aspect is part of the environment too. And then finally, when it comes to this action that you're trying to drive, to what extent are people even motivated to do so, right? Motivation is huge, and it's very multifaceted, right? There are more sort of explicit aspects to motivation, like, what are the beliefs that people might have or the intentions around it. But then there are also kind of the more automatic and implicit aspects to motivation, right? Like the emotional processes or the biases that may be at play. So as you're kind of starting to pull across your different data sources, right, that may be coinciding with where people are getting stuck or the drop-off moments, right? To what extent are you finding that you have maybe some data or evidence that can speak to any of these drivers of behavior? Capability, opportunity, motivation. So what I've been sort of slowly building up to and laddering here is not something that I've come up with. It's actually a pretty widely, extensively evidence-based behavioral framework called the COMB model, right? And so you can start to even layer this onto your approach to how you look at your behavioral data. So the COMB model, essentially, as kind of the acronym, suggests, it posits that behavior, the B in this case, right, is a function of sort of three core factors or drivers: capability, opportunity, motivation, right? And according to the COMB model, it can help you identify what's sort of missing in your experience, and then what you can sort of introduce to help drive a particular action where you notice that people are stuck. And as I'll talk about, what's also nice about leveraging this type of framework is that you can then start to solution in a way where you have more confidence. Because I also do agree with Eniola, right? As researchers, we should feel confident and empowered to also make strong recommendations. So let's take a look at an example. So back to the work that we do at Voya, right? We are very hyper-focused on trying to get people from what I like to say 0 to feeling financially independent. So when I say 0 to financially independent and financially confident, it's really someone, say, who has either never thought about or never really started to save, to starting to not only engage in the behavior, but add it as part of their behavioral repertoire. So I'm recognizing, and I'll pause, that we have a pretty global presence both in this room, but also remotely, which is pretty exciting. And so, I do think there's a little bit of context, at least about the US, that I should introduce here when we're talking about saving for retirement, just to kind of set us all up for success, which is that in kind of the last 45 years or so, at least within the US, right, there's been more of a shift away from, retirement plans and retirement savings being kind of more managed and controlled by employers. So think pension plans, right? Particularly in the private sector, toward being much more controlled by individuals. So think, defined contribution plans. So really the important piece there is that the responsibility, the onus falls more on the individual now to have to think about setting themselves up for retirement. And so the moment you introduce the individual in the equation, we have to think about things like obstacles, barriers that can come in the way, decision-making, right? And so that's a lot of what our team has to focus on. How do we get someone from point A to point B, recognizing that there are going to be different types of barriers, different types of obstacles that come up for people when, say, they have to engage in a new behavior that they haven't done before. For example, and this isn't just the case for savings, this is the case for a lot of behaviors, right? Think about if you've ever tried to start exercise regimen, meditation, right? We as humans, we are present biased, meaning it's really hard for us to try to forego immediate rewards, for example, right? I want it now. It's also really hard for us to envision the future. What else about us do we know? We have a really hard time with uncertainty, just generally. A lot of these things tend to lead to an action. So, as we're building these products, taking into account just these natural human tendencies and predispositions is important if we want to be able to facilitate, right, people being able to take the next step, if we want to lift these barriers for people to make things easy. For people who do and are trying to start saving, right, we'll employ a behavioral audit process in the same way that I was talking about before. So what do you think we learn? What do you think we find out? Well, we learn a lot of things that probably you would learn too if you started to adopt this process with your products, right? People get stuck, right? We'll find that people get stuck in a lot of different ways, but some things that are pretty salient. People get stuck when it starts to involve starting, and people get stuck when it comes to contributing to their future, right? And then when we do an even deeper dive, again, pulling across these different sources, as you saw, these different inputs, right? And applying that framework, we'll see that there are a lot of different obstacles that relate to those drivers of behavior, like capability, opportunity, motivation. Puts us in a position now to think about solutions to facilitate things for people. So how do we make that transition, though, from understanding the obstacles that people face to then coming up with solutions that we can have confidence, right? Are going to lift those barriers to enable people to engage. So going back to the COM-B model, another really powerful thing about it, right, is that, itself being sort of a mega theory that's been validated across a lot of different types of behaviors, it has what are called like intervention functions. The way you can think about this sort of chart is that it's not 100% perfect, but it gives you confidence, right? That there are sort of these sets of design features or elements that at a functional level, right, you can introduce in a solution. So think when you want to introduce, a feature, a nudge, like a communication, the degree to which you leverage some of these kind of at a functional level, you can have confidence that they're going to be relevant in terms of helping to address the barriers on the left. So back to our case, right, with people just trying to start saving. They get stuck when it comes to just starting. They get stuck when it comes to making a contribution to their future. Well, as you saw, we noticed that a lot of the barriers tended to be related to opportunity. And so, as you'll see, we started to explore solutions that involved restructuring the environment. Now, I will sort of add an asterisk there, which is to say there are a lot of obstacles that we find generally. And that's just not us. That's generally kind of the field, right? There's a lot of individual variation, both within individuals, across different segments, which means that there are a lot of different types of solutions that one could explore. What you're going to see here are, again, specific ones to specific types of kind of pain points within this experience, and ones that are looking, again, at kind of restructuring the environment. In terms of behavioral science methodologies, we leverage a lot of experimentation. So think commercial sort of randomized control trials, right, to sort of try to give us confidence as we are testing these different hypotheses. But if we sort of move from left to right, you'll see that, again, when it comes to just restructuring the environment, or again, looking at different ways of just organizing what people are seeing. This first example is just kind of a classic example of choice architecture, right? So we saw, in terms of some of the pain points that people were demonstrating when just trying to go through that enrollment process, right? Some people said, that they couldn't understand the information, or we even saw that just behaviorally through our product analytics, they were overlooking important plan information that they would actually need to be able to make the right or optimal decisions. So through testing, we found that just moving information, right, to be much more closely aligned with where they have to make decisions had an impact in promoting engagement and savings behavior, as did just simplifying the language. And then finally, choice of colors was important, particularly leveraging colors that have strong behavioral associations. So as you can see, the green, yellow, red stoplight colors, right, at least in English-speaking countries, right, is a pretty strong one. For the second example, we know that defaults or sort of preset courses of actions can be really strong and effective sort of interventions in situations where there's inertia or where people are sort of faced with, ambiguity or uncertainty. And so when it pertains to contributions and people not really being sure how much to contribute to their future or not really wanting to contribute to their future, this can be pretty effective, right, as sort of like a way to guide or nudge people to do so. So in this experiment, we were interested in seeing to what extent could we leverage that to get people to, again, engage and contribute and save more. So through a randomized controlled trial, we varied, right, the contribution amounts anywhere between 6 to 11%, to also see how much could we sort of increase that without having it backfire. And by backfire, I mean without having it be so high that someone actually, again, opted into inaction or not saving at all. and found that we could probably get as high as 10% without it backfiring. It helped increase savings. Third example, we know that as humans, our choices, our behaviors are influenced by the ways in which things are presented, right? The ways in which things are framed. So again, when it comes to contributions, just a slight tweaking of even how that percentage by paycheck is presented to people can have a huge impact in terms of how people engage and how much they save. And in this particular case, changing that percent per paycheck to a pennies framing actually had a huge impact for people who are from more, or who are more low numerate, meaning people who struggle more with numbers and percentages. And so not only did it help with increasing engagement, but also with decreasing savings gaps. So from an equity perspective, right, that was a great intervention for us to introduce. And so for this fourth example, for anyone that's been so blessed that they have had the experience of being able to roll over, say, an account, maybe then you've had the experience of being not so blessed that you quickly realized that it's actually pretty complex, right? And maybe you sort of backed out because you just realized it's a very multi-step process, lots of components, and it was actually really hard to understand. It's feedback that a lot of different experiences will often get from people. This is where attribute partitioning can be really helpful. With attribute partitioning, what you're essentially doing is you're kind of chunking information into things that are sort of more conceptually related. And then you're sequencing them in a way that sort of reduces the complexity into something that's a bit more digestible for people, and combining things according to the relationship among attributes. And so by applying attribute partitioning to this part of the process, people were able to engage more, right, and continue with the goal that they had of wanting to just roll over their accounts. And it was a win-win for both customers and obviously for a business in wanting to still have people resume their relationship with us. So lots of different instantiations of restructuring the environment. One over a lot of different ways that, again, you can start to go from your behavioral diagnosis of applying that sort of behavioral audit, thinking about solutions, testing them out, right? Leveraging behavioral audits, looking at the impact on outcomes. That said, right, it always sounds easy. There are a couple of things to keep in mind. How did we even get all that data? How did that process work? Well, unless you already sort of have that infrastructure in place, it initially is a very cross-functional process, right? You have to figure out what are the teams, the cross-functional relationships that make sense to have, and then recognizing that you always have to sort of build with measurability in mind, right? And making sure that your teams are building with measurability in mind so that you can set yourself up to, for example, have data for that same user and be able to connect and understand the downstream impacts across the board. Second thing I want us to consider, right? Just because people are motivated doesn't mean that they'll take action. Sounds a bit counterintuitive, but I'll say something that's related, right? Just because someone has all the information that they need doesn't mean that they'll take action. If you think about the combi model that I just presented earlier, right, there are different drivers to motivation. So when we're thinking about these experiences, or we're thinking about our product experiences, we have to take that bigger, more holistic piece and really think about the different drivers, right, of action. To what extent are we helping to kind of facilitate a person's ability to take action? Which is why it's really important that we sort of just generally and holistically apply more behavioral science thinking to our product development processes, right? Particularly the more strategic ones, right? We know that it's the products that sort of take this much more behavioral and accurate view of humans, right? And of human decision-making, right? That tend to be the more successful and resonant ones, the ones that deliver experiences that are easy, right? That are timely, that are relevant. And in fact, if there's anything that we ourselves experience and we see, right, in those products that we love all the time, it's that the really successful products are the ones that, influence and change our behaviors and can get us from that point A to that point B. The ones that are easy, that are timely, and that are relevant. Thank you.